but I really mean it this time. Oh, I have to present. All right. If you guys don't see my PowerPoints, let me know. You should see trees with clouds. So if you don't see that, then I've got it messed up. A little tip this time in the morning, don't wait in McDonald's. Wendy's has perfectly good coffee. I don't know why I spent all this time waiting in that stupid line at McDonald's. I think they're even slower than Wendy's. And that's a good McDonald's too. I mean, compared to other McDonald's. So I got nothing with this slide. I don't even know why I have it. So let's talk about how water moves through a plant. It starts with the it starts in the root, and it goes in the root and then it goes up. Well, water has different ways to move through the plant. So what we're looking at here is, I forget about this blue part that says vacuole, although that's important. But this here in light, like in tan color, this is inside the cell. And then this is the cell wall that they made in like that darker brown, right? So they just made it kind of exaggerated, right? It's not that thick, but this is like one cell, this is the second cell, this is the third cell, this is the cell wall going around the cell. And so what you notice here is that there's a, let me let this person in. There's a space there called a plasmodesma. So there's a space here called the plasmodesma. I view it as like Lego pieces, right? It's a way to connect cells together, but it also lets things go from one cell to another cell. So there's actually, with cells, they have a membrane and they have a cell wall. Our cells have membranes. Plant cells also have membranes, but they have cell walls. So I always give the analogy that like our cells are balloons. Plant cells have balloons that have been blown up inside of a box, right? So there's a space between the balloon and the box, right? So plant cells are a little bit different. That balloon's not going to pop because it's inside of a box. So that's kind of one of the things that cell walls do. Plants like that cell membrane to be really compact and really filled up with stuff, and it's not going to break because it's got the cell wall around it. So what you're looking at, you can see like a blue line, like a faint blue line that I'm kind of like going, that's the membrane. That's the membrane just like we have. And you notice that plasma membrane is jammed all the way up against the cell wall. So that's how plants do things, right? So the point is, fluids, water, has two routes to move. So one is called Simplastic. And here's the word right here at the bottom. So Simplastic. It's going from cell to cell to cell, and it's going inside the cells. The apoplastic, here's that other, I can't see it, but the other word over here, apoplastic, that's the red line. It's hugging, it's not really showing it to you like on this, but it's hugging that space in between the membrane and the cell wall. So it's like if you blow a balloon up inside of a box, it's not in the balloon, it's hugging that space between the outside of the balloon and the box. So inside the balloon, that's like in the cell. So it's in the box, but it's not in the balloon. So that's another way to take. So there's two ways that it could take. Simplastic route, and a simplastic route is like a continuum of cells, and then there's an apoplastic route, and that's a continuum of cell walls. So you see like the red line, it doesn't actually enter the cell. Then of course it can do both, but typically it'll go one or the other. So this is kind of showing you, here's the root, here's a root hair. So these are all dermal cells, like out here, this last layer right here. So here in the blue line, water is going through the cell wall into the cell, and you see it's just, you follow it, it's going from inside one cell to inside another cell to inside another cell, and it keeps riding that way until it gets all the way to the vascular tissue. And then it's going to ride up the vascular tissue all the way up the tree or the plant, whatever. If you look at the apoplastic root, it is hugging the cell walls. So this red line, you see it's not actually entering a cell, it's like hugging the cell wall. But if you follow it, eventually it gets to this purple line, which we're calling the Casparian strip. So it has no choice. So you can ride the cell walls, but eventually you have to enter the cell before you get up out of the root. So the water has to jump out of this cell wall and go into the cell. So you see how that red line turns into like a blue line. So the Casparian strip forces fluid into the cell. Okay, so then the question is like, why do you have these two different routes? It's faster. It's a way for plants to take up water a lot faster. Some plants depend on that. Some plants, like in hot environments, they're constantly losing water from the leaves, so they want to pull water up pretty quickly. And there's trees around us in Louisiana that can do an impressive amount of like pulling water up from the ground. But so why the other question is, why is the plant forcing the water to go into the cell eventually? Because that is a filter. The membrane is like all membranes are selectively permeable, meaning that they let some things in, but they don't let other things in. So, for example, this tree was in soil, like contaminated soil. It's a lot harder for these contaminants to get into the whole tree, because at this point, they'd have to be forced into the cell. So then stuff gets filtered out. You ever wonder, like they use fertilizer, like they use manure. They're essentially using feces to grow plants, and you're just eating all the fruit. It's like all the time, right? So you're eating fruit from plants that had just been sitting in feces. But it's fine. It's all filtered out, all clean. By the time that water gets up from the roots, I'd be a little nervous about eating. I mean, I'd even be okay eating the root, to be honest. But I mean, I'd be a little nervous with the roots if I knew that it was like manure was used on it. But if you're talking like tomatoes or something, no. Because all the water has to go in through the Casparian strip. So if this bacteria somehow got into this plant in the root, even if it took the apoplastic root, it's going to be forced. The Casparian strip here forces that water into the cell. So then it gets filtered. Because then next it's going into the xylem. So once it does that, it just can go up through the plant. So anyway, take away from this slide, I want you to know what is the difference between the apoplastic root and the symplastic root. Symplastic root is just going in the cells from cell to cell. The apoplastic root is going from cell wall to cell wall. That's another way to look at it. The Casparian strip, if I ask you what that is, it forces the water into a cell. That's what these like purple strips are doing. Okay, so look at this word up at the top, symbiotic. Symbiotic is a relationship that organisms have where each gets something. We have lots of that. We have lots of those relationships as humans. You know, we have lots of organisms that live in us and on us, right? You know, we have like mites, microscopic mites and stuff that live in our hair follicles, and um, we have lots of bacteria that live inside of us, and they do things for us, and we do things for them. We protect them. We give them food. They give us, for example, vitamins like vitamin K or some of the B vitamins. These are made by bacteria that are in our guts. So we're giving them something, but they also got a place to live and they've got food to eat. So we're giving them room and board. And they're making vitamins and doing many other things. That's like a new area for research, by the way, because like we really don't know what all these bacteria in our body are doing for us. Like we think that, you know, maybe they could be turning on enzymes or flipping on genes, maybe causing us to get cancer or get type 2 diabetes, or maybe they're preventing it, you know, and then we're screwing with the bacteria so they're not able to prevent it anymore. And so but anyway, that's an example of a symbiotic relationship. Plants have them also. And there's two main ones that I'm going to talk about. And this is the first one. So this is a fungus. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at like a really close view of a root. And this would just be like if you took your iPhone and you took your phone and you made the camera like ×5, and then you put it right really close to the root, right? So it's something that the naked eye could probably see, but you know, so here's the roots, and then you see this fungus living around it, right? And it's got itself like wrapped around it. In fact, this fungus is also living inside. So this fungus is outside, but it's also living inside the root. So they call it mycorrhizae, and here's the word right up here, starting with the M. So this is a fungus that lives with like more than 90% of all plants have this fungus associated with them. And what they do is that they expand the area that the plant can get water from. So if you think about like a root, it's just like I'm using my finger, right? It's just the root, and that's the only area you can get water from, right? But roots have root hairs, so that expands out the area a little bit, right? But there's also this fungus and expands the area out a lot more. Otherwise, you can only get water that's right there next to the root. If it's like touching the root, then that's it, right? And you suck that water up and then that's it, you're out of water. So this fungus works to pull water in for the plant. The plant gives this fungus sugar, food. So they live off of each other, right? Symbiotic relationship. So if you ever planted like you bought a tree at Home Depot or something, right? It tells you to use some of the soil in the plant, in the whatever. You can tell I'm not a plant person, right? But like you can't just take the tree out and put it in the ground. You got to use some of the soil that was already there. That's what they tell you. So you use that soil and then mix the new soil with it, right? Because that soil has that fungus in it. Right? You can't strip off all that soil. It's not gonna work. So that's an example of a symbiotic relationship. There's another one I'm going to talk about that involves bacteria. This one is a fungus. Okay, so how does water move through a plant? How does it go up from the roots to the leaves? We're going against gravity here. what's happening, it's a combination of the word transport and respiration. So we're calling it transpiration. So what's happening is that the water molecule is evaporating. Let's see if I got a better photo. Nope. The water molecule is evaporating from the tree, like like in the leaves, the stoma opens up, and it lets, because the tree's going to open up the stoma because it's trying to let out oxygen and trying to get in carbon dioxide. But every time it does that, every time it opens up these leaf pores, like this is like a leaf pore, right? Every time this stoma opens, water gets out. So when water leaves, water is, if you remember back to the earlier lecture, it's cohesive. So if I take a water molecule and I pull on it gently, the other water molecule is going to follow it. And so it's like a train, like a toy train. You know, if you take that front train and you pull on it gently, the whole train will follow, right? But if you take the front car and you jerk it off, no, it's going to come off. But anyway, if you pull that front car, the whole train follows. So water is like that, going all the way up through the tree. One water molecule is attached to another one, it's attached to another one, and it goes all the way down to the root. So as that first water molecule kind of like goes out of the leaves, it pulls on the next one, which pulls on the next one. And that's sucking water up all the way down to the roots. And I was saying some trees can do that with a lot of water. So like a cypress tree can pull 250 gallons a day out of the soil. So that's a lot, right? And that's why cypress trees, they need, you can't just plant them. They don't do well when you just plant them in regular soil. Like you see them around campus here on Nunez. We've planted some like out in the front building, but they're not doing as well as they should because we can't keep that ditch, that retention pond, we can't keep it filled up enough, right? It'll grow, but I mean, it really does well when that retention pond is flooded, right? So, but you know, different trees are different. I gave you kind of an extreme example, sucking up, 250 gallons of water out of the ground. That's a lot, but that's what's happening. The water is evaporating from the leaves, and then it's just pulling it because the water has these, hydrogen bonds. So it's just pulling it, and it just pulls it up from the roots. So I don't care about you knowing these things. This is just telling you, this little sign here is, I think it's called Poseidon, from like the movie. It's like water pressure. We use this word to mean water pressure. So what do I want you to know? I want you to know that water, as water leaves the plant, as it goes out of the leaves through the stoma, it's pulling water up down the trunk and all the way up through the roots and from the ground around it. And so this is the stoma. And so I showed it to you in the last class, and these are all plant cells, but they're not like marked here, right? So they're in gray right here, they're plant cells, whatever. This is the stoma in white, the space, the opening. And then these two are called guard cells, right? The guard cells are responsible for opening and closing the stoma. So if you notice some differences here it's open, and you see the space here is wide. And so here it's not, right? But another thing to look at, and you know what, it's not really showing you it really well, but see these things in light blue? They're vacuoles. So remember, vacuoles hold water. That's all the plant uses pretty much vacuoles for, is holding water. So if you look at there's two vacuoles instead of one, there's two in each of these cells. So if you look at the vacuoles on the right side and you look at them on the left side they're larger. They don't look larger to me, to be honest, but they're supposed to be. The person that drew this slide should have drawn them noticeably larger. So what happens is that when you've put a whole bunch of water inside of these vacuoles, it makes it buckle right here in the middle. And that's what's making it open. So in order to open this stoma, you just fill these vacuoles with water. And when you want to close the stoma, when you want to put it back to its natural state, which is closed, you just get the water out of these vacuoles and you close it. So that's how it changes. That's how they open and they close. Stoma, or we call them stomata for plural. The stoma or stomata, they open to let out oxygen and let in carbon dioxide. They open by forcing water into these vacuoles. And then they close by letting the water back out. And this is just showing how they do it. So these little red dots represent potassium. So K plus is the sign for potassium. Right. So don't forget that if you're going into medical something, right? There's ions that you need to know, electrolytes that you need to know. Potassium's one of them, right? So potassium is K plus. K for potassium. So anyway, you see on the left side, let's start on the right side. You see on the right side how it's closed, right? And you find most of the potassium is outside of these vacuoles. Right, so there's a little bit of potassium inside, but most of it's outside. And so that's what the plant does. The plant puts potassium into there's like potassium pumps, and it pumps potassium into the vacuole, and then the water's going to follow. Just like water follows salt or sodium, water follows potassium. Water follows solutes. Right, so we talked about this back when we were talking about hypertonic and hypotonic. I mean, this is essentially what's happening. You're creating a hypertonic environment inside of the vacuole, and that's making water go inside. And that's making this middle area buckle, and that's opening it up. And then when you want it to close, you just pump all the potassium out, and then the vacuoles shrink, and that's it, then it closes. So that's why there's three things. I didn't want to talk about these slides. There's three things that a plant needs. I think I have it on another slide, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There's lots of things that a plant needs, but there's three things that are in fertilizer. So there's three things that we've decided that plants really need, but they don't get good amounts of. And so the three minerals that are in fertilizer, you probably already know one of them, nitrogen, right? So nitrogen, potassium's the other one, and then the third one's phosphorus. That's the three minerals that you find in potassium. And NPK, right? So whenever you look at some kind of package of fertilizer at Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, if you look at the back, they have just different concentrations of nitrogen versus potassium versus phosphorus. So that's it, potassium. And this gives you an example of one of the things that potassium does. Right? It allows the plant to breathe. Without potassium, the plant's not going to take in oxygen, take in carbon dioxide, and let out oxygen. Don't have to worry about this slide. And you don't have to worry about this slide. The point I was trying to make here is that if you put animal cells, like our cells, into a hypotonic environment, meaning that if you were to put our cells in just plain water, what would happen is that water would go into our cell, because in our cell it's salty, right? Water follows solute. So inside of our cell, salty. If you put our cells in regular water, that water is going to rush into our salty cells and they're going to break. They're going to burst. We call it hemolysis. Plant cells, no, they don't work that way. Remember, it's like a balloon inside of a box. So they like to be in a hypotonic environment. They like just regular water. They're not trying to match. You don't have to match the water with the amount of solute inside of a plant cell. They don't care. They want just water, because it's not going to break. It's a balloon inside of a box. So the box is going to, the cell wall is going to keep the cell from bursting. So plant cells like these types of environments. So we call this, when a plant is like this, we call it turgid. I'm looking for the word right here. Turgor, or the state of being, Turgid, whatever, either word. Right, so turgor means that it's like this on the right, right? It's standing up. When you see it's withered, it's it's either losing water or it's in an environment that's not hypotonic. So it likes to have lots of water constantly entering the cells and pushing the cells up against that cell wall, because it's not going to break. It likes to be like that. And you'll notice that, like, if you see a plant like this, right, if you water it and maybe come back later on that day, it'll look like this again, right? It doesn't take like a week for it to go from the left side to the right side. Sometimes it just takes 20 minutes, depending on the plant, right? The reason is because it's filling the vacuole, right? So here's a vacuole, here's the withered cell, right? So here's the cell, and look at that little withered up vacuole, withered up cell, and here's the cell wall. So look at the difference between this cell right here and then this cell here. So this cell is when that tomato plant is kind of like wilted. That's what the cells look like. The cell's pulled away from the cell wall. So there's space in between the cell and the cell wall. Here you can't see any space, right? That cell is right up against the cell wall. So that's being turgid. In fact, if you look down here, look at this one up here, and look at this one down here. The shape of the cell is different. Like this one down here is like bulging, right? So that's how they like it. They like their cell walls to be like bulging. So you imagine a balloon that's like overfilled, and it's pushing on the walls of the box and bulging the walls out, right? That's what plants like to be. So that's this on the right side. We call this flaccid. That term makes sense, huh? I don't know why I have this. Okay, so let me go into soil. Soil is not soil. Dirt's not dirt. Right. Dirt is not just dirt. And the dust ball was a good example. So when you have soil, let me flip to the soil layers. Okay. So up here at the top, I don't know if you guys can see it, and it's okay if you can't, but soil has different layers, right? So at the very top, we have this layer called humus. Humus. You can call it humus, right? And that's like, it's literally like that. It's just part of an inch thick, right? Very rich in nutrients. You don't find this layer everywhere. If you're in like the woods or where there's like a lot of trees or something, then yeah, you find this layer. Um, it's very rich. And then underneath that, you find topsoil. So here, if we're looking here, it's hard to see, but I'm kind of like putting my pointer at the bottom of the topsoil. So that's the only useful soil layer. The topsoil is the layer that has nutrients in it. And so what's underneath it is you can't grow anything in it, right? I mean, a tree could go down there and get water, but a tree's not going to get any nutrients from the bottom, from the lower levels of soil. So it's only coming from that topsoil and the humus. So what happened back here, these people kept over, they were getting, this was like even parts of Louisiana, like up by Shreveport, and then going all the way to like the panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma. They kept planting. You're not supposed to keep planting like whatever you're planting. In this case, it was like mostly cotton, right? Cotton, first of all, soaks up a lot of water. Cotton uses a lot of water. They kept planting it. They were getting good prices. And so they just kept pushing and kept pushing. You're supposed to plant cotton and back off. Go leave it alone for a year. Plant some other plant maybe if you want. Don't keep planting the same thing in the same spot. You know, corn farmers, soybean farmers, they don't keep planting the same thing. They rotate their crops, right? These guys, they were getting great prices for cotton, and so they weren't doing it. And they dried up the soil, and then there was like really bad storms, like winds, and it literally blew the topsoil away. And that's it. Done. They're done. They can't grow stuff, right? And so this is, if you ever heard of it, this is what Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath about. It's interesting, and because there's a time in our country's history where Americans were mistreating white people. So it's very significant. We're treating white people, this is back in the 20s, we're treating white people like we were treating black people. So now, now the country's like, oh, hey, what's going on here? What's up with this mistreating people thing? And so, yeah, it led to a bunch of policies that benefited white people, whatever. Okay. So, but this all came from soil, because soil's not just soil. It's not, dirt's not just dirt, right? You can't just put any dirt. Like I put red clay at my house, and I can grow some grass after a few years, but I still can't grow stuff because it's all red clay. It's not, there's nothing in it. Right? It's going to take years before that soil is good enough where it has enough minerals to grow something. So it's not topsoil, right? So usually you find topsoil, and then underneath that topsoil, you find a combination. It's either going to be sand, silt, or clay. You know what clay is, and you know what sand is. Silt is kind of in between, right? So they all have their advantages. I should have shut my email off. So they all have their advantages and disadvantages, right? A sandy soil will let oxygen get down to the roots, or I should say nitrogen. But a sandy soil is not going to necessarily hold water, right? Clay holds water better, but it doesn't let air get through either. So ideally, you want like a combination. So what they sell is something called loam. So it's spelled LOAM. Loam is a combination. It's like a perfect type of soil. And this is an example of rotating crops, right? You see they're not all growing just like one thing. And And look, we'll get to that. Okay, look, here's the other symbiotic relationship that I want you to know about. So there's two. One was the Mycorrhizae fungus. That was where the fungus pulled in water, and in return, the fungus got sugar from the plants. This is bacteria that live around the plant, and the bacteria are getting, again, sugar from the plant. But what bacteria are giving to the plant is nitrogen. This bacteria, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, is probably responsible for all of our lives, right? Because we're not living without proteins. Proteins make organisms. The reason you're able to even grow is because of protein, right? So I know I pushed it when I talked about proteins, how important they are and how diverse they are, and they are, right? Nothing's happening without proteins. So where do we get proteins? We get it from meat, pretty much, right? You can get it from some plants or whatever. We get it from eating animals. Where do the animals get it? They get it from plants. Where do plants get it? Plants get it from the soil, but the nitrogen that exists in the air, like this air that is around us, is mostly nitrogen. Like, people think that this air is oxygen that we're breathing in. No, it's 75, 78% nitrogen. This is all nitrogen around us. We're breathing in nitrogen right now, and we're breathing it back out again because it's a triple covalent bond. So it's so bonded together that it can't be broken apart. So I'm breathing it in. I can't break it apart. I'm breathing it back out. Whereas oxygen, I breathe it in, and in my body, in my lungs, I can break it apart, right? But nitrogen, no, it's too tightly bound together. Same thing with the plant. Nitrogen's too tightly bound together. They're really attached to each other, and the plants cannot break nitrogen apart. So without this bacteria, the bacteria is going to fix it. The bacteria, fucking emails. The bacteria is, hope it's not you guys emailing me. The bacteria is going to take this bacteria that is this nitrogen that's like way too hard to get apart, and it's going to turn it into a form that the plant can easily break apart. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. If you remember your covalent bonds, it turns it from a triple bond, because the nitrogen sharing 3 electrons with each other. It turns it from a triple covalent bond into a single covalent bond. That makes it easy to deal with. All right, so that's the nitrogen fixing bacteria. Okay, so what do you need to know for like a test question? Nitrogen fixing bacteria make nitrogen usable for plants. You could write something like that. Nitrogen fixing bacteria take nitrogen from the air and make it usable for plants. Otherwise, plants couldn't make proteins, which means that animals wouldn't be able to grow muscle, and we wouldn't have proteins. Like the whole chain, right? It all starts with this bacteria. So bacteria in general are good, friendly, good. I don't know, I'm talking crap. But we always think of bacteria as like pathogenic, like harmful, but in the world, they're mostly good. Just occasionally harmful. So here's little patches of them, right? So this is like a legume, however you want to pronounce it. It's like beans and peas. They're rich in nitrogen, so you know that. They have like these nodules of bacteria around them. And so when you go up like to the north part of the state, they're growing sugarcane, and then when you go up north enough, they're growing cotton or maybe corn, right? But they're always swapping that out with soybeans. they shouldn't use just soybeans, but whatever. They're swapping it out with soybeans because the soybeans have nitrogen. So what they'll do is they'll let that plant grow. They take the beans off of it. They might even cut like the top part of the plant off, but for the most part, they leave the plant there and they let it rot. They don't pull the whole plant out of the ground. They let it rot there, and then they come back through and they mix it all up because they want those roots are gonna like these nodules. They they got lots of nitrogen, and they'll mix it in with the soil, and then they'll plant corn there, like maybe the next year, and then they'll swap again and they'll plant soy. Soy and corn, if you drive around this country, well, if you drive around the flyover country, that's it. Corn, soy, corn, soy, corn, soy. That's all you're ever going to see. I mean, we grow so much corn and so much soy. We grow more corn. If we took all the corn in the United States that's planted, it would fill up the whole state of Louisiana and then another Louisiana, and then maybe even like part of a third Louisiana. I mean, that's how much corn we grow in the United States. So it's more of the nodules. And, I already told you about crop rotation. So this is, they're pulling up soy. They're going to leave most of the plant. You don't have to know all this, but these are some nutrients that plants need. All of these nutrients are the same things that we need. The only difference is some things we need in large amounts and plants don't need in large amounts. It all depends, right? But you could see up here, here's the main 4 atoms that I was pushing in the beginning of the semester: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. Right, so those are up there. And then these sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, these are all electrolytes for us. Right, we have some other ones, like for us, we need sodium, for example. Sodium is very important, and chlorine is very important. So there's some differences, right? Chlorine's not so important for a plant. But anyway, you have the same minerals. And if you look down here and you're like, oh, zinc, copper, molybdenum, whatever that is, yeah, we use the same stuff, right? So the essential nutrients in plants are pretty much essential nutrients for animals, for humans. You don't need to know of them. I just wanted you to see it. We're almost done, by the way. Talked about soil horizons. That's it. The only other thing is, the mistake that we're making is that we're growing monocultures. So we don't grow a big variety of like corn, for example, right? Because certain corn makes good money, and you just keep growing it, right? You get good yields, and the seeds come from these companies. They used to be called Monsanto. They changed their name. Companies change their name when they get in trouble, and then they just keep going on, right? If you pollute a town, fuck it, just change our name. And so, yeah, it's pretty much like one strain of corn, right? So if something happens to that, then our whole food supply is screwed up. I mean, it's really like we think that there's diversity in food. It's not diverse. It's very unstable, right? And a lot of our food comes from corn. We don't even realize it, but we eat a lot of corn. Even if we never eat corn, we're still eating it, right? And if you mess up corn, you messed up every animal's feed. Fish eat corn, chickens eat corn, cows eat corn, pigs eat corn. None of them are supposed to be eating corn, but they do. And so you're screwing up everything if you just mess with the corn crop a little bit, right? So I think it's a big mistake personally, but all All right. I was going to get into this big thing about foreign policies and immigration and stuff like that, but I decided not to bore you anymore. We're done with this. So, test questions. Let me go back to the beginning. This apoplastic root versus the symplastic root. And that's one question. What does the Casparian strip do? So I would add that as the one question, right? So the apoplastic versus symplastic, and then the Casparian strip. So that's a question. Very likely I'll ask you about symbiotic relationships. And remember, there were two. I'm just making sure you guys aren't texting me telling me that. All right. I'm fucking blowing up today. Second question, symbiotic relationships. And there's two. One is, and look, the name, like this name, get it close. Right? If I know that you know the name, because again, are you going to have to know this for your life? No, but look, all information is important. I mean, if you don't know that now, you'll learn that one day. All information gets incorporated. It all gets used, just not directly used. So is this fungus going to be directly used for your nursing school? Never, right? So do you have to spell it exactly? No. I just want you to kind of have an idea in your head. So you have this fungus, and then you have the nitrogen-fixing bacteria. In both cases, they're getting sugar from the plant. The nitrogen-fixing bacteria give nitrogen to the plant. The fungus gives water to the plant. So that's the second question. Second question about, tell me about two symbiotic relationships. Question 3, how do stoma work? Stomata, right? How does stomata work? How do they open? How do they close? Well, they open because potassium is put into the vacuoles, and then water follows the potassium. That's it. That's the next slide, right? Potassium's the red dots. Potassium went into the vacuoles, so hypertonic, and then the water followed the potassium in to the vacuoles, and that opened this up. So that's a third question. Fourth question. You should be able to talk about the soil layers. So top layer of soil called humus, H-U-M-U-S. I don't even care if you write hummus. Take it. Top layer, humus. Underneath that, topsoil. That's all the nutrients. That's all you got to know. Underneath the topsoil, some kind of combination, sand, silt, clay. That's the soil layers. Humus, topsoil, underneath it, sand, silt, clay. That's it. That's good enough. I think that's good. Is that 4 questions? It's 4 questions. I think we're good. And I'd love to talk about like the Irish potato famine and sociology. All right, I'm not going to do it though. All right, so that is the end of that. So if you don't have any questions, let me stop recording. So those are the 4 questions from this lecture today. Then you have the questions that I said for the last lecture on Wednesday. And then add whatever you have from photosynthesis into there, from the quiz, right? It's likely that I'm going to ask some of the same questions that I asked you on the quiz, but the topics, yes. That's it. Those 3 chapters, that's exam 3. So those 4 questions, and then from the plants, it was like 3 types of cells. What are the 3 types of plant tissues? I already told you all this on the other lecture. And then I can't remember what else. But I did go through that. Like if you go to the end of that lecture, I go through it and tell you what I'm going to ask. So that's Wednesday. So I think like 10 questions. There's no reason you can't get an A on it if you prepare today. There really isn't, because you know what the questions are. It's just that I'm not going to use all the questions, right? So you're going to study like 14 questions and I'm only going to take 10, but you know what they are. So if you just write them out and then just study off of that thing that you wrote out. And even if you want, if you're like nervous, send me what you have written down. Send me your notes. I'll look it over. And if there's anything wrong with it, I'll tell you. So really you could make the test and just study off of that. And that's it. Get a good grade on this Wednesday, and then you're going to be back in the saddle in good shape. All right. Let me stop recording. If you don't have any questions, we're done.